to welcome Frank Raymond, Canadian author. One of his most recent books, Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. So please take a look at that. Frank, thank you for joining me today. We got serious issues to go over.
Uh, Everyone realizes that Canada gets worse every day. Their lives in the last 50 years has just gotten worse and worse. Everyone realizes that a crisis point is up ahead. These recent blockades by the native Indians show the extent of lawlessness that is to come. Um, it is, as you say, a critical moment, and I'm pleased and I thank you for calling me today.
Yeah, Frank, as you know, it's not restricted to Canada. This is happening all over the West.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
entire white world, all the white countries are more or less affected. Eastern Europe and Russia are less affected.
Parts of Africa too, I understand too, are getting affected by mass migration.
Which parts are we speaking of?
I met a businessman from Nigeria, and he said it's getting flooded with Asians.
Well, I don't know if that's mass migration. I think he means Asian business people.
But he said there's lots coming in, flight after flight. So I don't have the data. But could you just share a little bit about your background? Were you born in Canada?
Not at all. I was born in the Indian subcontinent in Calcutta, and I've spent my life more or less in the Indian subcontinent, except for some 7 years when I went to college and university in England. In England in the 1970s, I saw the beginnings of the destruction of the white world, the beginning of mass immigration, the talk of multiculturalism, the gagging and censoring of the native English by means of what they call the Race Relations Act, which is basically political correctness, gagging, telling them to shut up, threatening them with the law. It's got worse ever since. But that's when it began. And in 1993, I came to Canada. I came straight to Vancouver. I have lived here ever since, and I have watched Vancouver being destroyed. The beautiful green rustic city of Vancouver of 1993 is gone. Around me, high rises, constant construction, highways, more traffic, more noise, more pollution, more population.
Demographic change.
Well, let's not use neutral words like demographic. Let's talk about things like racially entirely alien peoples, alien to the whites, have flooded in. And I will urge you to say white people, white Canadians, because if you don't dare to even speak your own name, what chance do you have of surviving? If you don't have the courage to say that, you don't have the courage to fight for your existence.
It seems like you're doing a lot more fighting for white people than most white people. How do you account for that?
Well, I don't do much fighting. Only once in a while I give an
Sure.
interview. I haven't had to have my nose punched in. I haven't been to meetings and demos the way you have. You've come face to face with violent people. I haven't. I'm sitting behind a computer screen, so I won't say I'm courageous. However, I will. If this had happened in India, if you had pumped 50 million aliens into India, we wouldn't allow it. We'd stand up for our country. We wouldn't surrender 1 inch of our land. And we wouldn't be ashamed to say, we Indian people. So, from that perspective, seeing that, I, I'm astonished that white people can't say, we white people, as if they've been criminalized, as if their very identity is a criminal one. And of course, it has been criminalized. The sneak ruler regime, the sneak rulers who are intent on destroying the West, have made whiteness, the very whiteness, to be synonymous with evil supremacism. Turned whiteness, the act of being white, into a crime. So don't fall for that. Speak the name of your people. Speak for the interests of your people. Everyone else does.
Yeah, especially in India now with Modi in power. But we don't need to get into that today.
No, Modi's nationalism is a very complex one. We don't need to get into it. Your
Yeah,
nationalism should be a simple one.
exactly. So, Frank, we see Canada being radically transformed from a nation state, a beautiful nation state, patriotic, all about the people, the Canadian people, our identity, our heritage, our cultural, our values, who we are, being transformed into what we call a globalist state.
All
So,
right.
so this
Let,
globalist state, just to so people understand what we're talking about, this is like a post-national state, no distinct identity, cultural, no distinct heritage, values, extreme multiculturalism, and subservience at the end game to globalist institutions like the UN. Frank, would you
well,
agree with that?
I agree with a lot of it, but it won't be subservience to the UN. It'll be subservience to a more sinister group than that. And the UN is only one. The UN by itself is a good idea, but the UN has been subverted and is being used to destroy white countries. For example, recently, the, um, the UN passed a measure called the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP. Some call it UNDRIP. Now, the province of BC has adopted it, which means that law is now BC law, and which basically means that people can impose upon Canadian provinces and Canadian people a law made in the UN, made far away from them, and of this they were not consulted, but it has now imposed this on them, and soon they'll be groveling before every um, excessive or undue or extreme native demand. Now, the UN by itself is a good idea. There should be a world forum for people to talk, but it certainly should not have the powers to interfere in the business of individual states. Now, let's go to what you talked about, a nation state. Let's just talk about a nation state for a minute. A nation has nothing to do with land. A nation is an ethnic group. That is the definition of nation. The Franks were a nation. The Suebi in Germany, they were a nation. They were an ethnic group. They might move from one place to another, from one parcel of land to another, but it's the people that count. But when a nation, a people, an ethnic group acquires a piece of land and is there for a long time, they form a state. And that is called a nation state. Now, at one time, France was a nation state. At one time, today, Hungary and Korea are nation states. They're both nation states. They have an ethnic group identified with a piece of land. And that is a very great thing because it allows every ethnic group to have a piece of land they can call their own, to have a guaranteed soil to live on, guaranteed landscapes to look at, a, a living space in short. And above all, that living space, exclusive use of that living space, it gave them the right to a community of their own, to be among their own people where their peculiar culture and soul can be sustained, nourished, and grow. Now, when you deprive people of that, of being in a room full of their people, in a classroom of their people, in an assembly hall of their people, you deprive them of something very precious. The nation state guaranteed that. Now, Canada certainly did not start off as a nation state. It started as a semi-nation state, which means the white people were the majority. Those who founded Canada, the white people, they were a majority. And if they were, say, 90% majority, they could ensure a certain core. The native Indians would be there, but there would be a core and a mainstream culture, a mainstream ethnicity above all, a mainstream race. A mainstream race, ethnicity, and a mainstream culture would be there. It would be a semi-nation. Ideally, it should have, that is what, at that point, they should have split off. The native Indians should have been given a generous territory with a coastline and given independence and said, now you're on your own. We are not oppressing you anymore. You have a piece of land of your own. I hope you do well. Let us be friends. And there would be two states, one white and one native Indian. That didn't happen. Instead, Pierre Trudeau, a man who can only be described as a mediocre monster, decided to hand over Canadian territory, Canadian soil and the fruits of the soil, to every racial group in the world and basically dispossess white Canadians of both the soil and of the right to a society of their own, to a folk society. He deprived them of that. And so Canada is not even a semi-nation state, it's a state. But as I will explain to you, it doesn't even do what a state is supposed to do. It doesn't even do that. What I will say at the end of this talk is Canada is not a state, it's a province. It's a province of Oceania, all the white countries under a sneak ruler regime, which at the end of it, there'll be no white people left, because that is the goal of this whole project, is to genocide and replace the white people and replace them with aliens, black and brown people. This province, it'll be a province, and then it might even lose whatever boundaries you see today in Canada. They might just vanish. Those boundaries would be meaningless, certainly, so why shouldn't they vanish? Yep.
Yeah. So how does globalism fit into this? Hyper-globalization.
Okay, let's talk about what a state should do, and then I'll tell you what the globalist state, which means no state, a province, does. Okay.
Oh, so that's how you equate it, a province. So you
It'll
don't.
be a province.
So you
There
don't
will be
view.
an empire.
Yeah. So you don't view a globalist state as a state.
Not at all. A globalist state is not a state. Canada today is not a state. The USA today is not a state. It doesn't perform the functions of a state. These are now provinces of the sneak ruler empire, which some people will call Oceania. If you read 1984, there was in the book by Orwell, Oceania comprised a large part of the earth. And let's talk of all the white world, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, Britain, Western Europe, call them Oceania. All of this will be under the rule of the sneak rulers, and in these provinces might even cease to exist. 20, 50 years from now, the US might just be a memory. Already they are provinces, they don't function as states. Now that might surprise you, but let me then talk about what a state should do. And then you tell me if these are states, okay? So let me tell you what a state does. Now, a state is not necessarily a nation state. Malaysia is not a nation state. In Malaysia, there are Malays, there are Chinese, and there are South Indians. Yeah, the Tamils mainly. So it's not a nation state, but it is a state. And it's supposed to protect its people, which means that piece of land known as Malaysia will be there for the use of those people. Their descendants will inherit that, and everyone who lives there will can trace his ancestry back. Everyone will be a descendant of the founding Malaysian stock. You won't have mass immigration where you have 20, 30, half the population came from elsewhere and was not descended from Malaysian stock. That doesn't happen. In a state, it says, this territory is for us. There'll be no one else. It'll be for us, our descendants, their descendants. It'll be an ancestral state. This soil is for us. The fruits of this soil will be enjoyed by us. The property here will be owned by us. And for example, the state will act as an economic unit. Whatever economic activity will benefit the people of the state, it'll be done for the state. Now, what that means is they limit foreign investment. They don't want foreigners to own the production facilities. They'll limit it to what's absolutely necessary. Maybe if they absolutely have to, they will. For example, the trade, they will protect their local industries. They'll say, okay, we want to do the processing. We want to do our own processing so we don't have to pay foreigners with the national treasure. This way, we are better off. Everyone here is employed, and we don't pay foreigners unnecessary wages like Canada today pays China with its patrimony, with its trees, cutting down forests to feed China, so while we pay Chinese to make cell phones for us. So a state runs a state economy. A state does not allow foreigners to buy houses there. It says, no, our people need housing. This land is for us. What we build on this land is for us. Our boys, our girls will have to have houses. A state does all that. It protects its economy. It wants to do its own manufacturing as far as possible. I know sometimes it's not possible. You can't be making, say, steel mills in Malaysia. They are too small to make steel mills, so they'll import steel mills from Germany, say, who make very good steel mills for the whole world. But they will not let their sawmilling industry be taken over by foreigners. They'll do it themselves. They can make sawmills, okay? Now, state protects its land, it protects its people. It says everything on this land is for our people. It certainly does not allow mass immigration. It will not dispossess its people of the land. It will not allow the soil to be depleted by foreigners. Basically, it's an ancestral people. The people will have to be the descendants of a common ancestral base. Now, does Canada do any of that? No. Does the USA do any of that? No. Does today's Britain do any of that? No. These are what you call globalist states. And let's start with the first one. Oh, it's not a country in the sense that the people are important. Like even in a country like, say, I just gave the example of Malaysia, the people are important. They'll say, no, we have a self, therefore there's an other. We don't want others in here. Oh no, in the globalist state, the so-called globalist state, there is no people. The land is everything. They say anyone stepping onto the country becomes an American instantly. Anyone stepping into the territory of Canada becomes Canadian. The ancestry, the ethnicity doesn't matter at all. As soon as you step on, it's yours. It's everybody's property. It's akin to the whorehouse. Okay, any John who enters the whorehouse has as much rights as the next John. So a state provides a home. A globalist non-state provides a whorehouse. That's the basic issue. It's just a piece of land, and anyone can have it. For example, because of it's a piece of land, there's something called birthright citizenship. All these globalist states, or non-states, have birthright citizenship. Meaning if a baby is born here, that is a Canadian. That becomes an American. And therefore, there is birthright tourism. There are thousands of Chinese, well, tens of thousands, go to America and come to Canada in a pregnant state just to give birth and stake a claim to the soil. And when they stake a claim to the soil, they stake a claim to the civilization and the prosperity that Canadians have built. Now, if you don't have the elements of a state, the rights of the people, it becomes only a piece of land. And so why not give birthright citizenship? It's only a piece of land, it's everyone's land. So anyone who comes in here and somehow manages to get their feet in here is a citizen, and if they have a child, that becomes a citizen. So that's what a globalist state does. It dispossesses the native people or the founding peoples. It dispossesses them.
Sure. I'm going to shift. I want to put up this quote here. Are you familiar with Renaud Camus, French intellect?
Oh, yes. He was the person who coined the term, the Great Replacement.
Yeah, so he came out with this quote recently. I'm going to get your response to it. He says diversity ensures ethnic cleansing of traditional native people and a global slum.
Well, both of them have come to have shown
Yeah.
themselves to be true.
So he's living it in France.
Well, in
Yeah.
France, they are ethnically
Renault.
cleansing the French out of
Yes.
neighborhood after neighborhood.
Yeah.
Here in Canada, in Burnaby, where we have a South Slope, which was made totally by Anglo-Canadians. And beautiful South Slope was landscaped by them, and the trees were uprooted. The trees dug the stumps out of the ground. They built beautiful neighborhoods. And guess what? They've been ethnically cleansed out of it. Diversity did that. So I'd say Mr. Camus is spot on.
Yeah, fair enough. He goes on further. He says the advancement of deculturalization, and I'm going to paraphrase him. He says, when the occupiers, he doesn't call them immigrants or migrants, he says these people coming in are invaders, occupiers. He says when they are believed to be the natives, things have really turned to the worse. And I think what he's saying there is that's where it's at in France now, is that these occupiers, and what he means by that, Frank, these people are not integrating, they're not assimilating, they're actually occupying the land.
Well,
And he says now they're being viewed as the natives.
well, there are several parts to what you said. You said integrating and assimilating. Well, integrating and assimilating are a process of being colonized. It's you may have watched a movie, Pretty in Pink, or say a TV series like The Wonder Years. They showed American classrooms full of white kids, the descendants of George Washington and Davy Crockett. And then they had immigrants and they assimilated them. To assimilate them, they had to teach them English. They wanted to put them into schools. And today, those same schoolrooms are now full of non-whites. Assimilation really means legitimizing the colonization and empowering the, okay, it means
Yeah.
legitimizing and cementing the colonization. So the last thing you want is assimilation.
I
It's just
see. Interesting. So you support closed borders, pretty much.
I support nation states
Would
because
you would you allow any immigration in, migration in?
no, because we have seen the effects of it. When I first came to Canada, I was of the belief that Canada was an Anglo-French country and it would be enriched by having 1% or 2% at the most of non-Anglo-French Canadians. I believed 1 or 2% would be fine. And I wanted to be one of that 1 or 2%. And I wanted to integrate as much as possible and be a loyal Canadian and stand for Canadian literature, Anglo-Canadian literature, for their way of life, their outlook. But now I see that even 1% is dangerous. And especially for white people, they are unable to understand the cunning of aliens, the cunning of the sneak rulers. They're unable to understand that, say, the Indians, for example, or the Nigerians are not like them. They're a much more acquisitive, grabbing, aggressive people. They are not, they cannot handle this. They will be dispossessed, pushed out, always morally intimidated, always accused of being racist. So I think the best thing is for ethno-states to be living in peace with each other. Ethno-states. And immigration definitely has to absolutely stop to zero. Even then.
Interesting. One thing we find striking, Frank, is the court. It's almost as if this is being coordinated across Western globalists, non-states, let's call them. That this is actually happening not only in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, It's happening in Britain, France, Germany, Norway,
It is
Finland.
it is absolutely coordinated.
But
The
how could it not be coordinated? Like, it can't be a coincidence that they all have the same policies.
Oh yes, the hate speech laws are the same in
Yeah.
all of them. The movies that represent white people as worthless, inferior, shifty, and the non-whites as cheerful, brave, and wise, they are the same movies across all these countries. The university policies that denigrate whites and speak of white supremacy and so forth, they're all the same. It is absolutely coordinated. I have no doubt about it at all.
And the establishments in these countries, they're all in on it.
Well, what happens with any occupation, and you will have to understand that you're an occupied people. That's not a subject we are going to talk about today, but I have to mention it, that white people throughout Oceania are occupied peoples. They don't have the freedoms of sovereign peoples. They don't even have they certainly don't have the right to self-determination, the first right of a free people. They don't have the right to free speech. They don't have access to the free access to the media. They get suppressed in many ways when they speak of their own interests. Everyone else can. So they're an occupied people, but with any occupied people, there are collaborators. And of course, many white people have decided they'll just go along with the destruction of their country as long as they can get rich, as long as they can stash some money in a Swiss bank account or a bank account in Shanghai or somewhere. And they're the most shameless grovelers and bumsuckers anywhere. I was listening recently to a speech by one Mitch McConnell, I think Speaker of the House of Representatives, so some such high post in the US Congress. Such graven groveling is what happens with occupations, rulers, and collaborators.
Yeah.
You have collaborators among your people, and some of them actually have been brainwashed to believe that what they're doing is right. And maybe Mr. Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, is one of them. Maybe as he goes around saying that Canada will welcome any number of refugees. Of course, the refugees aren't really refugees. We all know that. They're not political refugees. But even if they were, so what? Why would you dispossess Canadians of their native soil?
They don't in the Gulf states.
They certainly don't.
Yeah.
Now, they don't anywhere. When Japan was asked to take refugees from the Middle East, their instant reply was, the obligation of the Japanese state is primarily towards Japanese. So we will not be taking any. Now, Mr. Trudeau is perhaps a collaborator who's out, a careerist out for fame, wealth, and money, but he may also be, and likely is, brainwashed to believe that his people are inferior trash who should be replaced by the superior alien. He's a collaborator, but
Yeah.
maybe he's a dupe as well.
It's not only him, Frank. We were actually at an event about a week ago, an Islamic conference, and there was Conservative Party operatives acting the same way.
Well, they're only interested in votes.
And we actually have it on video.
Well, they
were acting like Trudeau.
Well, the traditional parties in all these countries, for example, in Germany, the Social Democratic Party, or in Britain, the Conservative Party of Britain is not conservative. It's decided that they'll just go along with the destruction of their country, and get to stay in their country clubs for one more generation.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there is positive here. For example, the Alternative for Germany is doing very well now.
Well, that's a good sign. On the other hand, they're not totally, they may not be total nationalists. They might be a safety valve. They might be controlled opposition. We don't know that. The genuine opposition always pushes and shifts the controlled opposition in the right direction a little bit.
Right,
Uh,
right, right. I see. But also, there's fake alternative media more and more, Frank.
well, what do you expect? The
Yeah,
rulers are cunning. They
yeah.
they know all the tricks.
It's not.
As
It's not just fake mainstream media. Now there's a prevalence of fake alternative media.
oh yeah, that's always going to be there.
Yeah,
There's going to be that um, the disinformation, the vilification by for example, there was a party in Britain called the British Nationalist Party, and they got infiltrated, one branch, by fake people. And the fake people talked such violent, hateful stuff that then the media could point to it and say, there's the true face of nationalism, ugly hatred and violence. And there'll be, in the wake of 9/11, after the 9/11 attacks of 2001, there were fake alternative media that were deliberately meant to say some nonsensical things and cast the real truth movement into doubt. So the enemy has every trick up his sleeves, and some of the peoples that they have brought in are determined to colonize the land, take the sweet green acres of Canada for themselves. They have joined uh, in a lot of it. Okay, so we have to reckon with all these problems. But I wanted to quickly go through what a globalist state is doing.
mm-hmm.
And, I don't need to talk about the identity of a people, that with a globalist state, the identity of white Canadians, their ethnicity, the biological look of a white man or a white woman will vanish. I don't need to talk about the fact that their culture is vanishing, that their the things that they took for granted, the ability to assemble in a hall and sing their folk songs, which appeal to their folk heart, that's gone. Let's talk about the purely economic side of it. Um, for example, in a state protects its people in the sense that work is the greatest thing. If you work, you have to be paid. We work to produce fruit from the soil. We work to transform the wood into houses. We want to get the benefit of it. And we will get the benefit of it. We get a fair share of the national wealth. We get paid proper wages. But a globalist state will always have work visas. It will import labor and give them work visas. And of course, 90% of those people never leave. Now, there is no excuse for giving work visas to have people from Mexico and Guatemala working in the berry fields of the Fraser Valley down here in British Columbia. Absolutely none. And yet they're doing it, and in the process, they depress the wages of ordinary Canadians, which means they're not getting their share of the national wealth that they're producing. They're getting less. So the work visa program is certainly very big in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is the free trade. Canada used to have a textile industry, it had a leather industry. Canadians produced their own goods. They did skilled work in factories, working with machines, working with chemical processes. They did skilled work. The globalist state or non-state, the province, the globalist province, has said, "Oh no, you don't need to work as a country. You're not an economic unit. You're not a living unit. You're just part of the world. Canada's borders are meaningless. Canadian identity is meaningless." So they opened up Canada to every import possible. And now Canadians don't make their own textiles. They don't make their own clothes. They don't make their own shoes. And guess what? Canadians are paying for it with their patrimony. Chinese people make the cell phones and the battery chargers, and they want wages. And do you know how we pay them? We give them our timber. We chop down our forests. We give them our fish. And eventually we give them our very industries. Chinese and Korean firms own much of the oil sands because we have given them the money to do it by not doing our own work. And in fact, I hear that they're now owning many of the food industries of this country. So globalized free trade is a terrible thing. For one thing, there is no excuse for huge tankers and for huge supercargo liners to be plowing up the oceans, to be disturbing the habitat of the fish, to be polluting the ocean waters, going back and forth, back and forth. There's no excuse for that. The processing should be done right in our countries, and there is no excuse for food to be trucked in all the way from California. Absolute waste of gasoline and pollution of the air. Globalized free trade is possibly one of the worst effects of the globalist state. We should have trade. We should import only what is absolutely necessary, like machine tools and sophisticated machinery. That is the only thing we should be importing. We have made Canada into a land of hewers of wood and carriers of water. The farmers of the prairies, in the prairies, we make rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, wheat, and there is also potash, by the way, there. And we are depleting the soil of Canada to feed the billions of China and Mongolia. Okay? There is no excuse for that, and there's no excuse for the ocean freight that nobody talks about, the millions of ships that ply the ocean and consume electricity, pollute the air, and disturb the ocean and the fish within it. The habitat of ocean life is being destroyed by international free trade. Now, as a result of this free trade and the fact that Canadians are beggars doing service industries and household work, not to mention that even call centers have gone abroad. Every time I call some company and they call their call center, I seem to find someone in Bombay's answering the call. Now, there's no excuse for that either. Now, as a result of all this, we are giving away our money. We are owing money to the world, and therefore, guess what? They are buying up Canadian property, Canadian companies, even the oil sands. I wonder how much of Canadian industry, what industry is left, is actually owned by Canadians and how much is owned by foreigners. I wonder if we'll have any sovereignty, economic sovereignty, if half or more of our industry and our banks are owned by foreign interests. Now, you know that, of course, the first duty of a state is to give its soil and its housing to its own people. Today in Vancouver, it is almost unthinkable for a young couple to buy a house. Even if they're working, both working, which shouldn't have to happen, husband and wife both working. But because anyone can buy a house, anyone sitting at a laptop in Singapore can buy an apartment in Vancouver or in Ottawa for that matter. So we have a situation where foreigners own property and local people have difficulty getting property. That's another part of the globalist state. And investment. If I want, it was so at one time that you saved up resources to build new plant and machinery so that you would have more to build up to have beautiful highways. You ate less apples so that you have better highways and a new railway line or a new power plant or a new factory. That's called saving, and that saving was invested. But guess what? Whatever savings we have are being invested abroad. Canadians are putting their money into mutual funds that invest in a factory in Singapore or Malaysia or Sri Lanka. But there's no investment in Canada. We are getting to be a people of Hicktown farmers. Okay. Now, that also is part of the globalist state. Investment, foreign ownership, globalized free trade that deindustrializes the country. And of course, there's the foreign student matter. Our universities, we should have our universities for our people, for our children to get together, to develop their culture and to learn about their heritage, to learn about their history, their heritage, their traditions, and to become culturally richer in soul. Instead, the university is now a service institution. It's like a factory, and they're full of foreign students. That should never be, that Canadian people should be teaching foreigners. And of course, the foreign student visa is a foreign students program is an immigration program. The mass of the students never leave. But the universities are no longer centers of Canadian culture and heritage. The foreign student program is part of the globalized state. And guess what? They don't just come in and pay. They're given work permits now. A student is given a work permit, so he's not really a student. He's not, it's not money coming from a foreign state pays for his tuition. He's working right here in Canada to get himself through college.
He could be working under the table too. And there's, we actually looked at the data. There's, I think it was last year or the year before, it was like 500,000
Yeah,
foreign study permits.
I believe you.
Yes.
I absolutely believe you.
It's become a huge industry, but it's part and parcel, as you said, with the globalist state or non-state globalist province, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, I know many cases of people who've abused this student visa scheme. They want to get into Canada. They can't get in any other way. So they get admission to a university and they get together the money to pay for one term. If they can pay for one term, they get the visa to enter the country. Once they enter the country, they attend a few classes and then suddenly they're not students anymore and they're working. And then one day, the CBSA, the Canada Border Services, might ask them, what are you doing and why you're not in school? And then guess what? They make a refugee claim. Suddenly they become refugees and now you can't kick them out. Once they make a refugee claim, they're in. So by paying the fees for one term, they get admission to Canada and a lifetime in Canada. Now, that is also winked at by the globalist state. Your cabinet ministers wink at it. They know it's going on. But they regard the foreign student program as an immigration program, basically. That's also the globalist state. So what I'm saying is Canada is not a state. It is not performing the functions of a state that basically to protect the land, the economy, and the culture of it for the citizens. If everyone can be a citizen by coming in, then nobody is a citizen.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. So Canada is not even a state. Forget about it. It's not a state. It is a province of the snake ruler empire. It is a province of Oceania. And the whole of the empire is open to the world economically. It doesn't have a national self-interest economy. No part of Oceania has that. It is very sad when I think about it that the farmers of America, of Kansas and Oklahoma, are depleting the soil to feed China. And one day they won't have any fertile soil left. And they're doing so because the globalist state doesn't allow them to, Americans to make their own products. It says, no, we'll get it cheaper from China. In the process, a few collaborators get rich. You know, Walmart gets rich in the process. The stockholders of Walmart get rich. But the country gets poor. And the native people, the American white people, the founders of the country, they're being pushed to the margins. And eventually they'll just be told that, you're a small minority. Who the hell are you anyway? You know?
Yeah, excellent. I think we're gonna shut it down there, Frank. Excellent stuff. Please share your comments today, everyone. We're gonna review them, and we look forward to learning from you. And our message at NCA is let's take our country back. It has been stolen literally by these globalists and their puppet in media, their globalist puppet, political puppets, media puppets, the whole, these, what Frank was referring to. This is very serious, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Frank, do you have anything in closing?
No, sir. I will leave it at that. But I will tell you that the president of Germany a year ago told the German people there is no such thing as a biological German. There is no such thing. Germany is based, you can't say that I'm a biological German. The Moroccan or Turk who came in last year is as much a German as you are.
Yeah.
And that was said by the president of Germany.
Yeah.
Okay, these collaborators would be hung, flogged. They would be taken up in public, put on a scaffold and flogged at one time. They would be hung. But there's a saying, treason never prospers. For if it prospers, none dare call it treason.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Please leave your comments. Great discussion, and we'll have Frank on soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stephen.